Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous, and welcome to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce Executive Summit Canadian Cannabis, a growing economic sector home and abroad. My name is Nathan Meissen, and I am going to be your MC today. I'm the CEO of Diplomat Consulting, a consulting firm that focuses on regulatory and government affairs, business strategy, and business development for the cannabis sector, both domestically and internationally. I am also lucky enough to be the co-chair of the National Cannabis Working Group with the Canadian Chamber. It has been incredible to work with the Chamber to stand up the working group over the last 2+ years, and that work brings us to today. Although we are meeting virtually, I want to begin today's summit by acknowledging the Indigenous people of all the lands that we are on today, and acknowledge the importance of the lands which we call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their culture. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and present, and to consider how we can each, in our own way, try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you. Today's a really exciting conversation that has taken us a long time to get to. We're acknowledging the fact that Canada was the first G7, first G20 country that legalized cannabis, and that matters. The world has watched what Canada has done, and in a true order of Canadians, we've done it in a very unique way. 10 provinces, 3 territories have all rolled out cannabis differently at a provincial level, and we have hundreds of municipalities that have taken a different organization, implementation, and mandate for their municipal programs. When we think about that great step forward from a speech in a park in Vancouver to being one of the first OECD nations to actually have legalized cannabis, nobody knew what it looked like. We all knew that there was places that we could draw from, like Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, who had all gone before us. We had extensive conversations about Uruguay, but got to give Uruguay a gold star, but Uruguay is not Canada. And our obligations internationally, domestically, and to the brand of the world is different than Uruguay. So what we did and how we did it was going to matter. And I think one of the things that we have to reflect back on is when nobody knows how it's going to happen, and when the goal is to displace an illicit market, we created an environment where, because nobody knew, we created a very difficult circumstance for the cannabis sector, where everyone made sure that they were going to get theirs. And that has led us to a very difficult situation where we've created an environment for the cannabis sector where it's very difficult to talk about it. Between our marketing rules, between the tropes of the past that we have to come over, and to the political sensitivities of cannabis as an inebriant coming to the market, but it was black market or an illicit market for so long that even though it's a legal market, we don't want to talk about it. But that didn't mean that they weren't going to take their share. We have seen great taxation when it comes and service fees to the cannabis sector in Canada, from municipalities that for a normal business permit charge $2,500, but for cannabis retail, it's $33,000. To service fees and usury fees at a provincial level of 41.3%, to social betterment fees that have never been deployed into an environment to create better research and opportunities for us to continue to grow the economic and health understanding of how we got here today, to taxation from excise at a federal level that started at $10. Well, now at cannabis at 75 cents a gram, you're looking at a taxation regime of 125%. We need to make sure that we started offside and we're working towards the goals of cannabis legalization, which was keeping cannabis out of the hands of youth, which Stats Canada has shown that 50% reduction in youth-based consumption. Safe, regulated, tested cannabis. We have done an incredible job. There are circumstances around popcorn lung where Canada had 0 cases of that because of the regulated model that we created is a wonderful example of that. But displacement of the illicit market still is something that we struggle with. And that's something that we can work together and have those conversations today. I think the other things that we have to keep in mind is that this is an interesting cyclical cycle that we have to have a conversation about. Cultivations enjoy great love and great expectation at the beginning, but in a normal environment, industrial agriculture continued to move. Retail shine came out. I love useless statistics for the people that know me. And October 17th of 2018 was the hottest day in Edmonton, where I was lucky to be in 115 years at 23 degrees. Not only did retailers get to roll out legalization, but whatever deity you believed in sure was smiling that day and giving us great weather to see how that was going to roll out with. But the interesting thing and why the chamber matters is ancillaries today are seeming to win the day. Those are businesses like Dutchie, LeafLink, Scott's Miracle Grow, that are Shoppers Drug Mart, incredible organizations that are doing really interesting things that have the capability of not only working in our domestic environments, but growing abroad and seizing the opportunity that is being created. And I think when we talk about those ancillary businesses, I think it's a moment to take a reflection on the fact that one of the unique things about cannabis legalization that we never talked about, because of our violations of the international requirements to some of the conventions that cannabis legalization put us offside with, Canada created its own domestic supply chain for cannabis legalization. Not often in Canadian history have we ever stood up a sector that now contributes $18.3 billion to the Canadian GDP, that's larger than forestry, when we've created an entire ancillary domestic supply chain for it as well. That supply chain is an incredibly exciting thing, and I'm sure that's something that the incredible panelists that are on this call today will have a discussion about with you. As we look at the 3 years, there's a great opportunity for us to talk about what's next. We have a statutory review of the 3-year Cannabis Act, and that gives us an opportunity to talk about federally. But with 10 provinces and 3 territories, everyone did it differently. What can we learn from those? Who did a best practice? How can we take those things and maybe look at a harmonization and creating a model that we can agree to is the best in Canada, a best in brand for Canada that we can export around the world? Many countries are going through cannabis legalization now, and they're looking at Canada as the model. Why can't we create that model and create opportunities for the Canadian cannabis sector here and to take our Canadian companies abroad? I think during that time and with that opportunity, it's a great thing to talk about. Cannabis should be treated the same as other sectors. We need the same opportunities to be included in the same thinking as other sectors. One of the greatest ones in a parallel to is, of course, alcohol is another inebriant that everybody draws a correlation to. But we can talk about other sectors. But the first one is everything that alcohol has, maybe cannabis should be looked at. There's great opportunity for us to look to harmonize our rules to other standards that are covered by Alberta Health, Health Canada, Saskatchewan Health, Atlantic Canada, Quebec, to find opportunities to harmonize those rules, to create a sector that can move forward quicker, faster, and seize the opportunity to grow and to help lead a COVID recovery. Because that's what cannabis is. Cannabis is a COVID success story. There's not been a lot of COVID success stories, although we have come together and it has been interesting to see what that's looked like. But cannabis has continued to grow and take new storefronts that traditional retailers have done. We've seen 3 countries in North America talk about cannabis legalization. Canada's the progenitor of that conversation. What an interesting opportunity to take that forward. Today, we're going to have a great conversation, and we're really excited about the people that are going to carry this forward and have conversations about this and very many other things. Now, before we dive into our first panel, I'd also like to make a very special note of thanks to the outstanding partners whose support has made this great event possible. A very big thank you to each and every one of you, and of course, the Canadian Chamber membership. Without those ideas, talent, and participation, conversations like this one we'll be having today wouldn't be possible. I also want to take a quick moment to go over the various features of this great platform that we're using this conference. You can navigate this platform by clicking a menu on the left of your screen. You can find the program and all of the speakers' biographies by clicking on sessions. And we have great speakers today, so I recommend taking that opportunity and figuring out who's speaking and creating an opportunity to follow up with them, which is also, You can network with those peers and other individuals by clicking on networking or by using the chat widget on the right of your screen. We also encourage you to stay engaged with us on social media by using the hashtag executive series and by following along on our social media wall, which you can find by clicking lobby. And if you ever need help of any kind, it's only a click away. Click on networking, search for Canadian Chamber of Commerce in the attendee list, and send your question and somebody will come to the rescue. Now that we have all the housekeeping out of the way, happy to introduce my fellow Canadian Chamber of Commerce Cannabis Working Group co-chair and just an incredible woman and moderator of the first panel, Green Cousineau, Director of Corporate Affairs at the Green Organic Dutchman. Green, take it away.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you for these great opening remarks. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So as Nathan said, you know, cannabis is a COVID success story, and we thought today that we would start by talking about the economic impact of our industry. As you know, it was in the agenda for today. The Canadian Chamber partnered with the University of Guelph to conduct an analysis of the cannabis sector's economic impact. As we know, collaboration is key to the success of this industry, and I think it's in that spirit that the Chamber has partnered with the University of Guelph. Unfortunately, Professor Spencer Hansen couldn't be with us today due to health things that he needed to take care of, and so he's continuing to conduct his study, and there's going to be an opportunity for people who are watching today to actually participate. So if you are interested in learning more into the next step, don't hesitate to use the Slido question tool that you have in the platform to input your contact information, and we'll make sure that Professor Hansen gets your contact information to send you more. And also there's going to be updates toward the year with in regards to that study. But without further ado, we have a great panel today to talk about the economic impact of our industry. So I'd like to introduce our three panelists. First one is Ivan Rosrana. Ivan Ross is the Executive Director of the Global Cannabis Partnership. Welcome, Ivan Ross. We have Brendan Kidd, National Cannabis Industry Group Leader at BDO Canada. Welcome. And we have Rashid Naik, Senior Director, Medical Cannabis, Shoppers Drug Mart. Hi, everyone. So let me start with the question for you guys. Cannabis has only been legalized for 3 years. It's already having an indelible impact on our economy. What is needed to sustain this economic health of our industry going forward? Maybe we want to start with Brendan?
Sure, just as my dog started barking. I mean, I think there's a few things, but I think Nathan hit the nail on the head in his discussion a moment ago, that it needs to be treated like any other industry, you know, or at least treated as a I don't know, a real industry, I guess you could say, by the government and all local government. I mean, it's I feel like everyone's got their hand out. They're trying to regulate it to a very heavy degree, and then every level of government has its hands out. Like I was reading an article yesterday actually about the city of Vancouver and how they've decided to adjust their business licensing fees for cannabis shops. And the progress that they're making is now, instead of being 79 times the price of a business license fee for an alcohol shop, it'll only be 30 times the price. And I think it's just a perfect example of how every level of government across the country is expecting to have a windfall from the industry, while simultaneously the government is over-regulating. So I think there needs to be a realistic view. And if these handcuffs are taken away from the industry, I think that we can do a lot more with it and support the economy much more than we are.
Great. Rashid, Ivan Ross?
Yeah, I was going to echo kind of the concern, you know, especially with us on the medical side, like the excise issue is very problematic in terms of the cost to patients, and it also affects consumers on the adult use side as well. So I do feel that I get that sense that everybody's sticking their hand out to get a piece of the action, I guess, on the cannabis side, and it's definitely affected the industry. And furthermore, like I think working for Shoppers Drug Mart and Loblaw, you know, those channels aren't really being utilized. The pharmacy dispensing channel, you know, your traditional retailers being outlets for the sale of cannabis products really needs to be used to really expand that consumer and patient base as well.
I would just add, what we all sort of not necessarily forget, but what policymakers don't seem to understand, and I'm all for looking at this industry like others, but we have to remember, cannabis is a very unique product, right? It has health effects and it has, for lack of a better term, fun effects, right? And so it's different. Yes, alcohol, tobacco, food, whatever you want to name it, but there's a real medical aspect, and I don't want us to ever forget that, right? And I think what Rashid said, I would want to echo also, is that to my mind, if you look at cannabis, and people will say the medical market is going down, what we can do is understand that it is a healthcare product, from taxation to distribution to use, and you need to include the healthcare continuum, right? So I don't want to forget that. And then specifically, to my mind, coming from policy and regulatory environment, the regulations, I fail to see why we're still treating cannabis as a dangerous product. I mean, I think if you look at the regulations, it's more dangerous than plutonium, for crying out loud. And I say that ad nauseum, but it's when you think about what producers have to do, what retailers have to do, I mean, really, all the security features are there. And I do understand, early conversations with Health Canada, they said, we want to start from a position of strength. They never said overregulate, but have the regulation so we can move it back. Well, okay, you've got 3 years now. Don't get into that bureaucratic lack of movement and say, we've got really good evidence. It's not necessarily, nobody wants to get rid of regulations. I think we all around the table here understand the value of regulations in any industry. But there are a lot of things that could be done to make it more efficient overall. And I do think this industry is heavily overregulated. So I'll leave it at that.
No, that's very interesting. There's a lot of chatter these days about retail. We know that the city of Toronto this afternoon is having a vote to see what they could do, put a moratorium. There are a lot of licenses. People talk about retail, but actually Health Canada gives also licenses every week for more LPs. And we know that we're in a space where there's overproduction at this point. What can be done to ensure the success of the industry, of every of its parts, basically, at this point?
Well, so I'll jump into that, I guess. The least person to speak about retail, but I gotta provide my opinion. I think moratorium, I think the market will generally take care of itself. And it's not that I'm a free market capitalist and good luck out there, but I think, there needs to be somebody to pull back and to say, is it such a bad thing? Everybody is complaining about having 20 pot shops on their same street. Yeah, it's not a great look necessarily for any sort of concentration of any business, but over time that will sort itself out, I think. And so I think we have to move around that and to say, look, it will eventually adjust over time. But if you're giving consumers lots of choice, that's a great thing. And I'm going to go back to the other point again about on the retail side. There will be people who disagree with me, but and I don't work for Shoppers in case anybody's wondering, but there has to be a role, I think, for pharmacies and that medical side of the product writ large, right? So I'm actually advocating for even larger distribution in that sense at the sort of retail level, because if I'm taking cannabis for medical purposes, and no offense to any of the retailers out there, I don't necessarily want to go into an adult use place. I want to have a conversation with my physician and my pharmacist, given if I'm on any other pharmaceuticals, and have that educational understanding and discussion with them. So I'm more of an advocate of, open it up to pharmacies, open it up to people who have the knowledge, want to have the knowledge, and have that discussion. And then of course, on the retail side, I want to go and talk to the bud tender and say, hey, I want to feel X, Y, and Z this weekend or whenever. What do you guys recommend? What's great tasting? What's enjoyable, right? Just like when I go to the LCBO here in Ontario and say, what's a great wine to pair with this? Or, what do you think of this brand new vodka, et cetera, et cetera?
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the regulation issue a little bit too, I think. I mean, I think reducing regulation on CBD specifically is an easy win. I think most people can agree that where there is a psychoactive effect, there's less concern about it where it's sold. And I think if you had a reduction in the regulation of CBD specifically, it would allow entry by a lot of those traditional retailers that Ivan Ross is talking about. In that, I think there's probably a lot of retailers out there that would like to get into the space, but they don't want to deal with the regulatory hassle, everything that comes along with selling cannabis products. So if CBD was deregulated to a large extent, that would make it very easy for it to put into all sorts of traditional food and beverage and health and beauty products. And I think it would get a lot more broad distribution through traditional retail channels. And then the cannabis shops could be more like Ivan Ross is talking about, where you go for more recreational type product and looking for advice on that, and almost separating into the two distinct products that CBD and THC really are in a general sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously echo the pharmacy dispensing a language. We've always supported that as a company. From the retail perspective, I have a colleague on the Loblaw side that's involved in the adult use sale on that side. And I think what would be very beneficial for retailers is to be able to work directly with manufacturers in terms of product procurement and the like. I think that's a key thing that's missing. And we see that on the pharmacy side. When you see a pharmacy selling drugs, they buy those drugs from a distributor, or they don't, it's not just a central provincial distributor that they're purchasing from. And you could set up buying groups. There's a lot more opportunities in that respect, and I think retailers need to be given that opportunity to work directly with manufacturers and negotiate directly with them, or for a distributor, a private distributor, to sort of emerge to provide that service to stores.
Yeah, I can add from a licensed producer point of view. I mean, the fact that the differentiation is not really allowed, and it's really hard to talk about our products, so let alone for retailers. So I think this is probably a big impediment to creating that relationship and the confidence also with the consumer, and providing them with the information that they need to embrace the legal market. And try new products and embrace the legal side of our industry for sure. I'm going to switch gear a little bit and talk about international, because I have you three, and I know that that you have experience in this. So Canada, as Nathan was pointing out, second country only in the world, but we know like regulation is moving so fast in other countries as well. So what would you, give as, what do you think that Germany and the US and other countries can learn from what we're doing? And how can, and I'll switch gear after and come back to what Canada can learn from these countries. But let's start with what countries can learn from Canada.
Well, I got to jump into this too, because this is a fascinating topic, and it's within the remit of the Global Cannabis Partnership, if I can have a shameless plug for our organization. But I think there's tremendous opportunities for governments to obviously learn what we've done right and what we have done wrong, right? And so there's always challenges and opportunities, and it's not to say we messed it up so horribly that it doesn't work. But I think one of the great factors that they can learn about Canada is that there is a path to legalization. Internationally, it does work. And I know, Corinne, you and I have talked about this, and lots of Canadians understand that once legalization has happened, writ large, right, the sky hasn't fallen. We've heard that. There haven't been an uptake on, overdoses or anything like that. And the one thing, this sounds a little bit obscure, but I love Stats Canada, right? The way they have been able to compile those statistics, I think really helps the industry overall and consumers for the education. So any country going forward with that, I think needs to sort of compile that so they can then show the proof of here's what's working, here's what's not, this is where we need to pull back and have that kind of discussion. So I think the Stats Canada stuff has certainly a lot of good information there, and any other country should sort of replicate that. And I pull from that all the time when I give, when I talk or so forth, because it's useful information to show, cannabis is not as dangerous as we thought. Yes, but we also want to understand, risks associated with that, which that information has. So obviously knowledge is power. And I think that's really helpful, is to have that type of agency for another country for sure.
I think that Canada could learn from what's going on in other countries. I mean, I think Ivan Ross made a great point that they can learn from some of our mistakes, and I think we can see how things are being rolled out elsewhere and learn from that. Like, for example, through Latin America, you're seeing companies that are setting up their own medical clinics that offer not only cannabis products, but traditional medical procedures and remedies. They're working to educate medical professionals through sponsorship of programs in universities. And that's helping to create a market specifically around the medical aspect of the product. And I think that's something we've missed a bit here in Canada, is that I think we were so excited about the recreational legalization as being, that brass ring to strive for. But I think personally that the larger opportunity in the market is probably around the medicinal aspects of the product. And there's a lot of maybe non-traditional cannabis users that would be interested in trying that to replace like sleeping pills and things like that they might currently be using, that I don't think we've fully capitalized on yet, because we're not reaching out to that medical community and looking to insert the products into traditional medical channels.
Yeah, and I think I kind of, going with that train of thought, I think, a lot of these countries are probably going to adopt a medical approach initially before they move to the recreational, which is what essentially Canada did. The sky didn't fall when patients started taking medical cannabis, and then they introduced the legalization. Again, like I feel like, especially when legalization did happen in Canada, we felt like a lot of patients were kind of left in the lurch, not just from how the regulations were designed, but also from manufacturers. We had a really hard time getting our hands on product for our patients, and they're the most vulnerable population. So I'm hoping that should legalization happen in US, Germany, or wherever, that they really consider and they give sort of that equitable access to patients that they've given to adult use consumers. Because currently right now, that's just not the way it is. I mean, I can walk down the street and purchase adult use cannabis, whereas, one of my patients who's, providing CBD oil for her child that has epilepsy has to wait in the mail for it, right? So it's definitely inequitable in terms of that access. And should legalization happen in other jurisdictions, there needs to be sort of that equal playing field for sure.
And that's an excellent point. And if we look back at basically the reasons why Canada legalized the mandate, right? They held Canada mandate. The economic aspect of our industry was not included in it. It was purely about displacing the illicit market and protecting public health. And that's, Health Canada's mandate is a regulator. Where do you see this going within this new government that we just elected? Do you think that, in light of the way that our industry has grown, the number of jobs that were created, and also, let's look at COVID. I mean, I hate to always use COVID as a excuse, but we badly need the economy to restart as soon as possible. So what do you think, like in the short term, that this government can do to boost that economic side of our industry, basically? Who wants to take this?
Brendan, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of things we've been talking about are easy win. Well, maybe not an easy win. Nothing regulatory is an easy win, but I do think that reducing some of the hindrances that we're talking about, the heavy taxation and the overregulation, I think would really help. And I do think the industry has a lot more to contribute to the economy in terms of jobs. And well, I mean, there's a whole ripple effect of additional services that go behind it. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Maybe Ivan Ross can hop in there if you had something.
I think your dog agrees with you.
Yep.
He's citing his support.
The fourth panelist.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the other thing is just to have a grown-up conversation. And I know, getting politicians and, Corinne and just to get your local MP to come visit the facility, for instance, that employs 100 people, 200 people, 1,000 people, whatever, is still very difficult, right? So I find that very fascinating. Brendan talked about it, obviously, and so did Nathan in his opening remarks. The ancillary services that are coming out of this entire industry are a big employer, right? So I understand where Health Canada is, but industry, I said I'd like to see them take a bigger role. It's still very difficult to have conversations with BDC, the Business Development Bank of Canada. I find that perplexing beyond belief that they can't necessarily touch cannabis. And I also find it very perplexing, the EDC is doing some work in this area, and I love to see their commercials about getting back to business. Well, you've now got this robust industry that has issues, no questions about it. But let's start the conversation about what the economic impact is. And obviously we're doing that here with this panel, but that's where the tremendous opportunity, I think, lies, whether you're a large scale license holder, ancillary business, retailer, craft cannabis. There needs to be a proper economic kind of strategy behind that. That's nothing new to the government of Canada or to provincial governments. They do this in almost any other industry. So I think it's time now that we have that grown-up discussion when it comes to this industry.
Yeah, thank you. I like to, I say often that sometimes in this industry, it feels like we're the crazy cousin no one wants to see at Christmas. We're part of the family. We were created by the government, but outside of Health Canada, even them, sometimes they don't really want to talk to us. It's really difficult to get that grown-up conversation and talk about what the future of the industry potential is. Rashid, did you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you look at the valuations of a lot of these cannabis companies and, it doesn't really justify just the Canadian market. So it would be great to have, more support from the government to, we developed this expertise, the best growing facilities probably in the world are in Canada. We need to export that knowledge. And I know there's a lot of countries that are against cannabis, but I think from a medical therapeutic perspective, there is an openness, especially the CBD side. So there's a lot of potential to export products to these countries, even CBD products as well, just as initial before they're more comfortable with THC. So I'd like to see that, the government really push that sort of expertise and export.
Yeah, I think you're making an excellent point in terms of, Canada with our regulation. That the good side is our products, in other, natural products, for example, our products are trusted worldwide. It'd be good to be able to bank on that expertise, even in our industry. Brendan, you were going to add something?
Yeah, my last thought came back to me. It's something we haven't touched on yet, and maybe it's probably a little bit controversial, but I think one of the things that we could see from the government that could have a very quick effect is a improved enforcement on the gray market. I mean, it's that would have a positive impact on the economic recovery, perhaps not so much from a jobs perspective, because there are people working right now in the illicit market that might just shift to the legal market. From a taxation perspective, that would allow more taxes to come into the government, and that helps with the economic recovery. But I think it would also help to reduce some of the stigmatization right now that is preventing the ancillary services from being engaged in the industry as much as they are. Because I think that a lot of the hesitancy that, say, insurers might have or bankers might have on being involved is that they don't know whether everything that a potential customer they're looking at might be doing is above board. And I think if there was maybe a cleaner, maybe for lack of a better term, market, and the government was providing some level of enforcement so that there was less or no gray market, that might actually reduce some of that stigmatization and allow the market to operate a little more freely than it currently does.
Mm-hmm. Anyone has anything else to add on this? I have more questions. I want to tell our audience too that if you want to submit questions, we're gonna discuss a little bit more, but then we're going to take questions from the audience. So don't hesitate to submit your questions right now. And in about 15 minutes, I'll go to those questions. We talked earlier that the Cannabis Act review was going to start soon. And technically, October 17 was the date in the Act. Can you talk about 2 or 3 things that you would like to be seen addressed in that review? Knowing that, we still don't know what the scope of that review is going to be. So who wants to start on this? Ivan Ross. Oh.
Okay, I'll jump in then. Thank you, Corinne. Specifically what I'd like to see is hard look from the production point of view for license holders as to, every single amendment that they have to do has to go through Health Canada, whether they're changing a room, they have cameras all over the place, they have secured fences. I don't know the last time somebody broke into a cannabis production facility. Maybe I'm missing a headline or something, but it doesn't seem, as such a threat as they once were. And the proof is there. I mean, at the very beginning, I remember, production facilities had to have these huge vaults installed. They got rid of that, right? So that's a big cost. And I think there's ways that the efficiencies can do that. And I know the review doesn't necessarily want to touch on that necessarily. So my request would be a wider review than what they're doing, because I think, people around this panel, I see the chat comments going on. Overall, there could be some really good solutions there for the industry writ large. The other thing I would say, to give a specific example too, is if we're going to talk about an international market and exporting Canadian expertise and product overseas, I mean, again, we're beholden to this system that's archaic and Byzantine beyond belief, right? I mean, it takes close to 2 to 3 months to get an export permit when the importing country said, yes, we've checked you guys out, here's your permit, you can send the product over there, right? I don't understand why that's the case, given, all the rules have been followed, given the heavy regulatory burden we have. It's a safe product, right? If it's produced by LHs, I think all the rules are followed. And I think it behooves any kind of LH to somehow get a product over there without going through the proper regulatory channels, because they won't be able to sell it. So and nor will it be able to be transported, quite frankly, because no transport company would touch it with a 10-foot pole. So I think there has to be some acknowledgement of that work being done, and some acknowledgement of the rules that have been placed 3 years ago and longer than that, to say we can move things forward. And again, I will reiterate this point. I definitely would like to see no tax on any medicine. I think cannabis is a medicine. I think the tax has to go away. And I want to improve the distribution angle, whether it's a pharmacy or a medical clinic being allowed to do that. And finally, the third, and then I'll shut up, is, I've got 2 dogs. Brendan's got a dog. Why can't that be considered from a vet to go there and say, hey, try this new medicine for your pet, right? As opposed to the illegal stuff out there. I know a little bit obscure, but there's all these easy solutions that do not push safety, the illicit market, away from that. There you go.
People spend a lot of money on their pets.
Yeah, they do. Do they?
Yeah, I think I'd add to that I think lightening up on the regulations around packaging and advertising as well would make a big difference. When you go into a cannabis shop, I because of the way the packaging is, it's very difficult to even tell what some of the products are. And when you think about it, that really is a big impediment to someone trying something in the industry. So you have someone that's curious about it, or maybe somebody that used to use a product back in their 20s and now they're in their 30s or their 40s, and they think, well, now it's illegal now, so maybe I'll get back into it. And they go to a store and look around and say, I don't even know what this stuff is. And what other industry do you have where their products are so obscured that it's difficult to even tell what kind of product that you might be looking at? So I think that would make a big difference in allowing the industry to accept new customers, I guess you could say, and encourage people to try out the product.
Good point. Rashid?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I echo the excise tax, regime on medical patients. It's a huge burden, but one thing that is often not talked about is the operational burden it has on licensed producers and even medical distributors such as ourselves. Like, we initially launched with a medical sales license thinking we were going to be able to sell the product across the country. And because of that excise duty framework, we actually had to get a processing license, and we have to manipulate the product before selling it to patients, which is a gigantic operational burden on us and our suppliers as well. So I'm hoping, Health Canada can talk to the CRA as part of the review of the cannabis regulations to figure out a solution. And I always use the analogy, imagine a retailer having to label every box or every package of M&Ms that they sell to their store before they're allowed to ship it out. That's essentially what we do on the medical side. So I'm hoping not just from a the taxation perspective, but also from like the operational perspective, there's some changes made. And finally, like I mean, I honestly, I've echoed this before. We need to create a framework for patients that give them equitable access to medical cannabis. This e-commerce call center only model, it's a great option for patients, don't get me wrong, but they really need to expand that to retail locations, whether it be through pharmacy dispensing. That's obviously something that we've always advocated for, but give patients the ability to go into a retail location, pick up their medication, and have that discussion with a pharmacist on side effects and things like that. That's something I'd love to see in the Cannabis Act.
Yeah, it's the Cannabis Act review, and we're going to talk about it in another panel a bit more in depth later, but it's not the only opportunity for change. So hopefully people watching take notes, and we're going to see more change coming, because after 3 years, it would be time to look at all these issues, especially on the medical and patient side, and fix those. I see some questions coming in the platform, so I'm going to go to some of these now, if you don't mind. The first one we have is it realistic to have CBD available with DIN number and include as a prescribed medication? This would open up insurance coverages and enhance options for health management. So maybe Rashid, do you want to start on this?
So, I mean, the possibility exists. I mean, Epidiolex technically is a DIN product with CBD. I think the approach, and I'm just guessing here, that Health Canada is most likely going to take with CBD is giving it kind of an NHP status. So they're probably going to give CBD a monograph of some sort, and then allow manufacturers to manufacture under that monograph. So if it goes that DIN route, I think there's going to be clinical requirements that a lot of LPs can't really meet in terms of the Health Canada approval process. But again, it's just conjecture right now in terms of how that framework is going to work. It could be a DIN. With regards to insurance coverage, I mean, we do that right now. Like, we are providing a means. We are working with a lot of public and private insurers as well to cover the cannabis that we sell through our platform, which is, the benefit of going the medical route is, there are insurers that are looking at that and are currently covering it, with a traditional insurance card. You pay and submit, or we actually do online billing as well on our platform. So those programs exist despite the lack of DIN, but it would be great if we could establish some sort of DIN framework for cannabis.
Okay, thank you. Ivan Ross, Brendan, last. Okay, we'll go to the next one. Someone's asking, how has Statscan measured the economic impact of the illicit market versus the regulated market?
That's an awesome question, and I know they do. They don't have the answer after I'm the one who, did some propaganda for Statscan. What I think is not a surprise to everybody is that Statscan, it's a self-identification. So yes, we have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But I think the trend is that we're hearing not only that's being buttressed with Statscan, is that the trend is going down, the illicit market versus the regulated over time, which only makes sense, right? If we kind of can't have it both ways. If we've got shops on every single corner, there's a convenience factor there, versus the illicit market where, yes, you might have a steady supplier, the person shows up on a bike or a car or whatever and gives it to you. But I think over time, it will disappear. And I think there's great movement towards that. And I would hope also, the other part of the global cannabis framework is that we are slowly seeing the illicit market come into the regulated market. And I think there has to be room for that. I think we have to remember that legacy side of things, given overall that this is a plant large. So I think there's some movement. So I know I went off a little bit on the Statscan stuff there, but the methodology is sound, is what I'm trying to tell you, with all the assumptions laid out.
Sounds good. We talked earlier about the Canada first mover advantage. What impact do you think that, for example, the US legalization would have on the economic impact of our domestic industry? Maybe Brendan?
That's a question. I was going to say it's a great one, but sorry, Brendan.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, it could be a massive opportunity for us. There's a lot of established companies in Canada that have used the Canadian capital market to have economic strength and have entered into deals with U.S. companies so they can move quickly once it's federally deregulated. But at the same time, the U.S. is a big market. I mean, there's a lot of money available there, and I mean, you're probably going to see a lot of capital coming into U.S.-based companies once the federal deregulation happens. So, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity, but I think there's also going to be a lot of losers from the Canadian market when that happens, just needing to compete on a level playing field with our big brother to the south. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Ivan Ross?
I concur 100%.
Now get your crystal ball out. I'm going to ask you when it's going to happen. No, just kidding. I'm not going to do that to you. I think everyone's guess is as good as the next guy at this point. We have a question on the platform. Can anyone touch on regulations separating hemp from cannabis? And do we see things relaxing on regulations for both industries?
I should hope so. I mean, I think that's another very valid question. And I read the comment in the chat. I think, again, hemp, was sort of the model for cannabis way back when it was Canada. And I think hemp is overregulated beyond belief too, right? So given they're both cannabis, I mean, it's still the same sort of plant with a different genetic makeup. I mean, for crying out loud, why wouldn't you look at those rules? And why are we not treating this as an agricultural crop plant, hemp, cannabis overall? So I think, there has to be some movement to understand that. And the whole world has looked at hemp in various tough regulatory regimes where only so much THC could be in there and so forth. But, hemp is multifaceted like the rest of the cannabis plant. And so I would want to see a relaxation of those regulatory rules too, not for the sake of relaxing regulations, but they're regulations that simply are not efficient, not necessarily fair compared to other industries. And, again, if we want to benefit from the agricultural know-how in this country, I think it's silly to sort of keep it so heavily regulated and controlled where it's very hard for an operator to do anything.
Yeah, if we look at regulation in general, I mean, we saw during COVID, the Health Canada did some modification to help companies being able to operate. And I think it was really based on, they did risk-based analysis and basically to see, well, if we do these changes, for example, having customer service not on the premise of where the license is, for example, like the risk is so low that these guys don't have cannabis, like it's really taking calls. And probably applying that risk-based analysis to every regulation in our industry would actually benefit us and remove a lot of that red tape that is costly for companies to operate and would help, with our success as a whole, right? Good. I see someone commenting in the chat about cannabis tourism and hospitality, and that brings a question to me: is what other pieces of the puzzle basically are under explored right now for our industry? Like, what other pockets of maybe of economic development have we not even started to scratch the surface? And I think cannabis tourism and hospitality is an excellent example of that. Do you have other examples that spring into mind talking about this?
I certainly do. I mean, I think, the way companies, laboratories, and the testing regimes that we've created in this country are fantastic and definitely something that can be exported around the world. And having sort of firsthand knowledge of that, with the Germans and the Israelis and so forth, they've all got their testing capabilities, but they learn a heck of a lot the way cannabis is tested for a whole multitude of things, right? So I think that laboratory scientific strength is extremely important. And I think that's what's really interesting and key also to transferring that scientific knowledge. So it's not only about the production, but it's the scientific knowledge that we've built up. Testing is the easy example, but it's also, again, looking at the risks and benefits of the plant that I think we are, I hope, ahead of in the world.
I was
Rashid?
I,
Yeah.
I was gonna also add to that, like, I think when you look at the international cannabis market, it's very medically focused. They want to follow a proper sort of drug approval process in the rest of the world. And if you look at, I think with what the U.S. did, the DEA just granted 5 growing licenses to various companies throughout the US. So there's a huge appetite to do that type of research. And it's not warranted in Canada because we already have a medical framework and patients have access to it. But to create that sort of research specialty that a pharma company can take for a particular cannabis-based drug and take that to market in another jurisdiction, I think it's a huge opportunity for us to develop that expertise. I mean, you look at GW Pharma, they got sold, I think, for $7 billion because they went through that process with Sativex and Epidiolex. So the appetite is there, and Canada has that sort of framework to do these studies. It's completely legal here, and it's there's a variety of sources for the product and a variety of means to manufacture various drugs. So I think that opportunity exists here, and a company should look at that very carefully and see if they can take that and launch in international markets as well.
Okay, I'm just looking at the questions here. Someone is asking, will distribution through pharmacies negatively impact retail sales and contribute to retail stores going out of business? So,
would you like me to answer that?
well, I'd like you, but I know that Ivan Ross has some interesting thoughts too about the pharmacy distribution and growing the pie basically and offer. So, but yeah, please go ahead, Rashid.
Yeah, so I mean, I look at like natural health products is an apt analogy in the sense that natural health products are sold by natural health food stores. They're also sold by pharmacies. And you go to a Shoppers Drug Mart, if you want something really specific, you probably might not find it there. You'd probably have to go to a natural health food store. So I think the Shoppers of the world, the Rexells of the world through the pharmacy dispensing channel, they're obviously going to be serving a medical patient with insurance coverage. I don't see how that would negatively, overtly impact sort of a recreational distributor in that regard. So it's 2 separate markets. Are medical patients going to recreational stores right now? Yeah, they are. But again, it really reflects the fact that they need to consult a physician, speak to a pharmacist about side effects, and that's why we've always supported pharmacy dispensing, and I don't think it would have a gigantic impact on the recreational retail sales.
Thank you.
Certainly think there's space both, right? I would want both. And I think there's really fascinating models given this world we're in with on virtual conferences and so forth, whether it's a traditional pharmacy, a specialized pharmacy, a specialized store, an online system. I think there's lots of very good companies that offer sort of that medical side of things where you can talk to a physician, you talk to a pharmacist and get it online also. So I definitely think there's space for both out there given the size of it. And I just go back to, again, making the point that cannabis is a very unique product overall. And, the education has to come, and I'm learning about this plant every other day. I don't have all the knowledge for sure. But again, I just come back to the very simple thing. I'd want to talk about a physician if I'm going to take something for medical purposes, arthritis, pain, sleep, etc., before going to, and again, I'm not trying to offend retailers, but the retailer has a different mandate and wants to sell a different product, right? And so that's where cannabis is fascinating to me. It's unique beyond belief, right? I can't think of any other product out there that we're having this type of discussion where it serves both kind of environments overall. So I think there's enough space out there for both of that for sure. It's going to be hard.
I mean, I agree. There's definitely space for both, and I think there's a huge untapped market that would be served by traditional retailers. I mean, I think of a conversation I had with my neighbor a while back, and his mother was interested in trying cannabis products for health reasons, but she wasn't comfortable going to a cannabis retailer on her own. It's not something she'd ever considered doing before. She wasn't into cannabis, and so he had to take her down there and kind of walk her through it and help her through it and everything. But I think there's a lot of people, particularly in older age groups, that are probably curious about using cannabis products to displace maybe some of the prescription medications they're using now, or for other therapeutic reasons, but because they've never used cannabis before, they're not comfortable going down to a cannabis shop. But a traditional retailer, absolutely. So I think if that were to open up, I don't think it would impact the current cannabis retail market at all. I think it would just open up a whole new world of potential customers for the cannabis industry.
Yeah. We have a question for Rashid. Where do you think the medical field could do more to unlock opportunities? And do you want to see dedicated research dollars?
I think, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I guess from our perspective, we've seen the cannabis industry shift from a medical focus to a recreational adult use focus. A lot of the products are geared towards that. I'd love to see, products focused towards the medical side. We've been talking about forever, like I would love to have a salbutamol type puffer available for patients who are not comfortable smoking or using a vaporizer. So I'd love to see those types of products being developed for the medical side. And as I've said, pharmacy would be the perfect distributor for those types of products. So that's where I'd like to see things shift. And I think fundamentally, the medical market in Canada is much smaller than the recreational market. But I think a lot of suppliers and manufacturers need to realize that internationally we're dealing with a medical market. So whatever's developed here can easily be exported to the broader international market. So I'd like to see manufacturers more focused on that. With regards to dedicated research dollars, yeah, I think that's extremely important. Getting sort of that DIN status for cannabis products would be huge, not just for patients to get it through pharmacy or get it covered through insurance, but also with Health Canada approving something like that, European Medicines Agency, FDA, would be a lot more comfortable approving a drug under a similar vein. So that would open up another market for those drugs. But again, nobody's willing to put that money down because there's the patent issue is a problem. Like, how are they going to get protection on that? So to get that sort of work done, that research done through funding would be a great opportunity, I think.
Right. We have, would a halt in federal licensing by Health Canada positively stimulate the cannabis industry, the cannabis sector, sorry?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, would a halt in, it's H's, when you're French, it's really hard. A halt, I have to overpronounce, in federal licensing by Health Canada positively stimulate the cannabis sector?
That's a tough one to answer, because I'm kind of torn, to tell you the truth. And I give you a little bit of a background. I did an interview in, 2014. And the question was, how many cannabis companies do you think would be, like operating in Canada? And for the life of me, I said the magic number of 50. 50. I couldn't think there would be any more, right? And now we're almost close to like 800, for crying out loud. So, I think, we're oversaturated. There's no question. The tough thing that I have is actually having Health Canada say no, right? They've created a regime. I think the regime needs to be fixed, as opposed to just saying, no more, we're not giving it any licenses, right? And I know there's a huge sort of civil service behind that. But if somebody wants to try their luck, as it were, to go into the market, they should be able to. I'm not a fan of saying, we're only going to give so many licenses to so many people, because then I think it creates funny incentives at that point. And we've seen that. But I think the regime has to be fixed, because clearly this country alone cannot survive or handle, 780 LHs. They're not all distinct. Obviously, some companies own a bunch of other licenses. But what I want to see is the regulations are a little bit clearer and more flexible in that sense about how you determine that, right? And I think they started down that path with craft cannabis producers, but of course, the details make it very difficult. The taxation regime makes it difficult, and so forth. So I think it's all tied together, right? Unfortunately, and we have to make small changes to steps. But I have a hard time saying, Health Canada should halt it. So, apologies to anybody who thinks that's the case, but that's just my view on that one.
Brendan, did you want to add to this?
No, I agree. I don't I don't really think that limiting the licenses are going to help. I think the system needs to be fixed. That's the problem.
Great. Thank you so much for this great conversation. We are almost to the end of our session, so I will ask each of you to do, closing remarks, things that we haven't talked about that you want to touch on, or reiterate some of the points that were made. And I'm going to start with Ivan Ross.
I thought I talked too much already, but listen, I really enjoyed this panel. So Brendan and Rashid, thanks so much. It's always great. And Corinne and Nathan, thank you very much for doing a great panel. And the participants, the questions that I've seen come in through the chat, again, what I'm trying to say here is, I think if we have a 3-year review coming up, we've got a great opportunity to benefit from a lot of different perspectives and experiences. It's the government's role then to take them and manage it. But I do want to see the government go forward and affect positive change. And there's a whole scope of them. I don't want them to narrow down the scope and say, then we're going to put it away and that's it. Because there are a lot of issues, right? And I think it's going to be detrimental to this industry. And we should not forget that, right? This is an industry that I'm attracted to, that I got in for various reasons. It's the only industry I know of that is an essentially brand new kind of industry sprouting up, that's homegrown, that we all have a chance to participate in. There's lots of challenges, there's no question. There's certainly funny business going on, but that's no different than any other industry. So I think if we approach this rationally in a grown-up fashion, have a discussion how Canada does their mandate and has a very thorough review. I mean, thorough about trying to touch on all the issues. They're not going to give us all the solutions we want, but I think if we at least have that discussion, that's half the battle. I'm passionate about it, but that's my hope and belief. Thank you. I'm going to go to Brendan.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now it's a really interesting time, and it's a big opportunity for the cannabis sector to grow. I mean, and what I mean by that is, I think over the last year and a half through COVID, people have been changing their habits, doing things differently, and we're slowly getting to a point where we're starting to transition back to whatever normal life is going to look like. And when I look at the things that I'm doing, my day-to-day habits, I mean, and I talked to a lot of people having the same experience. They're revisiting things they used to do, and they're bringing in new habits, changing the way they used to do things, changing the way we work, changing the things we consume and buy. And I think now is a great opportunity to start shifting people over towards the cannabis industry as part of those new habits. So I think it's a big opportunity, and it's something that the participants in the cannabis industry need to work towards and really start pulling those new customers in. But I think having some cooperation on the part of the government to do that, reducing some of the regulatory, reducing some of the taxes, I think would really help that growth. And I think that we could see a big surge in cannabis product consumption over the next couple of years if we do things right and kind of establish a new level to the industry. But I think it's a great opportunity. It'd be a real shame if we missed it.
Yeah, thank you, Brendan. And I think if there's a key word to where our industry is, I think collaboration is needed, and between companies, between like retailers, license holders, but also with the government. And I think you hit it on the head with this. Rashid?
I guess my closing remarks are going to be very medically therapeutic focused. I've been working with Ivan Ross in the industry, I think since 2015. We've seen a lot of companies focus on the recreational side, which I've said before, with products and even just their whole ethos is very focused very recreationally. There's still that therapeutic potential that exists for cannabis. There was a huge opioid crisis. A lot of prescribers, physicians, nurse practitioners reduced their opioid prescribing quite significantly. And a lot of these patients are left with pain and other psychiatric issues, and there's really no alternative for them. So I think cannabis represents a good opportunity. Even looking at recreational adult use consumers, a lot of them are, using cannabis for recreational purposes, but they're also using it for sleep, anxiety, and therapeutic purposes. So I think there's a real need for manufacturers in Canada to develop products that are focused on that, not just, getting high on the weekend, but that therapeutic purpose that would appeal not only to our medical channel, but also even to an adult use kind of OTC type channel as well. So I think that potential exists, and even when you look internationally, that's the only potential that exists right now, is that therapeutic medical channel. So I'd really urge any manufacturers on the line to really look at that aspect of the business, because it's a huge untapped market, and it's definitely would be beneficial for patients and the public at large.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, you three, for this great conversation. I think that it's clear that cannabis is part of weathering this the economic downturn actually that we're in, and prepare for the next phase of expansion of our industry. I think that our industry shows tremendous promise, and there's definitely a potential for growth and lasting prosperity there. So thank you, everyone, for your great thoughts. So I now welcome everyone to enjoy a one-on-one conversation with the Member of Parliament for Beaches East York. He's been a great advocate of our industry. It's Nathaniel Erskine-Smith. After that, be sure to join for panel number 2, Health Canada Review Update, where they're going to talk even more about this review that we're all expecting to see very soon. That is at 10:55. Enjoy. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.